Hi everyone, here's a quick video just looking at how to analyse graphs, which is a type of exam question you might get. So here's an example question. It says, describe the changes in figure 1 and figure 2 and explain how these changes have taken place. It's a 6-mark question and it's got 2 command words, describe and explain. So let's go through each figure and look at what information we could get from each figure. So here's figure 1. And if you look at figure 1, it has got 2 y-axes. And what you should do is talk about the data that is linked to each of the axes. So the first bit of data we've got is the change in mean global air temperature. And if we look at the graph, it's the solid line, we can see that overall there is an increase in the mean air temperature. So to describe this graph or tell the examiner what it shows that the global air temperature has risen overall. We could add a little bit of extra information to say that the rise is not steady, it is erratic. For example, there are some points where temperature decreases, such as 1996 here. Then we can look at our other y-axis, and this shows the change in global mean sea levels. And if we analyse the graph, it's the dotted line, we can see that the mean sea level is increasing. And we could say that the global sea levels have risen steadily. Let's look at figure number 2. So again, we've got 2 y-axes, so we'll need to describe what is happening for each of those pieces of data. The first one, amount of carbon dioxide in parts per million, that's the solid line. And we can see that clearly that is increasing. So we could make a statement saying the amount of carbon dioxide has risen steadily. So now we need to describe the amount of methane in parts per billion. And this is the dotted line. And we can see that overall we have an increase. So I've said the amount of methane has risen overall. However, as we saw on the last graph, the rise is not steady. And so we could add an extra bit of information saying there was a sharp increase between 1998 and 1999, just here, and a small decrease around 2005. Okay. Just as examples of the fact that it's not rising steadily. So let's go back to our question. So the first thing was to describe the changes, and we've done that, and I've arranged those bullet points here. So we saw that carbon dioxide has risen steadily, methane has risen overall, if a bit erratically, global air temperature has risen overall, if a bit erratically, and the mean sea level has risen steadily. So now we need to think about how we could explain each of these changes. So carbon dioxide has risen steadily. And hopefully you know by now from the previous lessons that this is because of increased fossil fuel combustion. So the more fossil fuels that we burn, the more CO2 there is in the atmosphere. You've also learned that methane is increased because we've increased cattle farming, our increased use of landfill, and the increased amount of rice plantations. And all of these things produce methane. Global air temperature has risen, and I'm sure you now know that this is linked to greenhouse gases. So carbon dioxide and methane are greenhouse gases and they trap heat. And one of the consequences of our increased global temperature is that it causes things like the polar ice caps to melt, and this will cause our sea levels to rise. So what we can see here is that we've described what the graph has shown, and then we've given an explanation for each of the things we've described. So now I need to actually write the answer to my question. And you need to remember that to be able to get 6 out of 6 marks, you have to include relevant points and you have to give details. You need to logically link these things to form a clear answer. So you need to think about how you're going to structure your answer so that it reads as a brilliant paragraph that makes logical sense. We also need to make sure we're answering the question by describing changes and explaining how they've taken place. Okay, let's have a go. Okay, so here is my answer. I've said that figure 2 shows that the amount of carbon dioxide has risen steadily between 1992 and 2016. This is due to the increased fossil fuel combustion. It also shows that the amount of methane has also risen overall. The rise is not steady. There was a sharp increase between 1998 and 1999 and a small decrease around 2005. Rising methane is due to increases in number of cattle, landfills and rice plantations, which are sources of methane. Carbon dioxide and methane are both greenhouse gases. These gases trap heat and cause global temperatures to rise, which can be seen on Figure 1. Figure 1 also shows a steady increase in sea levels. This is linked to temperature rise, as increasing temperatures cause polar ice caps to melt. Now I think this is a pretty good answer, and I'm going to show you why. So I'm going to highlight different sections of my answers. Those parts highlighted in yellow are descriptions, and those parts highlighted in pink are explanations. So I start with a description of Figure 2 graph. And I've not just explained the trend or what the line showed, but I've also included some figures, just to make it clear what I'm looking at. I've then gone on to explain why that has happened. Then I've done the same for methane, and then I've explained why. So I've described and explained. In my next paragraph, I've slightly changed my order. So I've explained first what links carbon dioxide and methane to global temperature rise, and then I have linked that back to Figure 1 and described what that figure shows. And that's totally fine. You can do it in that order as long as it makes sense to the reader. Then I've gone on to finally describe the last part of Figure 1, the sea level rise, and I have linked that to an explanation linking temperature and sea level rise. It's your turn to have a go now. I've sent you a sheet with these two graphs on it, and I've asked you to describe the trends. So the trends are the changes shown in the figures. And I'd like you to then suggest and explain the consequences of these changes. So explain why and what might be happening. Good luck.